So we are going to start Ultimate Journeys, the third book that Robert Monroe wrote. And we are just starting it today. Today is the first.
Just let's have a little brief on it. Will you brief us on the book a little?
It's coming, it's coming.
Okay.
Forward. Robert Monroe is a map maker. In Ultimate Journeys, he seeks to chart that area which lies over the edge, beyond the limits of the physical world. He presents us with a map of the interstate, the route that opens to us when we leave our physical lives. With its entry and exit ramps, its signposts and its hazards. This he is able to do because he has traveled the route himself. He writes from knowledge, not from belief.
Now, this is important, right? He writes from knowledge and not from belief. So what the person who's written the foreword, which is Ronald Russell, he is clearly indicating that whatever has been written in this book has been actually experienced and understood by Robert Monroe, and then he is writing it. And now what is he writing about? He's writing about what happens after we die, after we leave the physical body. Okay, that is what he is writing about. He calls it the interstate. That is the state between the different states.
Monroe's first book, Journeys Out of the Body, was published in 1971. Since then, according to Dr. Charles Start, one of the leading experts on consciousness and human potential, innumerable people have found comfort and help in the knowledge that they weren't alone and weren't crazy just because they had had out-of-body experiences.
So right, now the first book that was published was Journeys Out of the Body. It was actually published due to Dr. Charles Start, who gave Robert Monroe's diary, his daily notings, to his publisher. And since Charles Start was a highly revered kind of a consciousness explorer and a published author, the publishers naturally paid attention, right? That is how the first book came up. And that is how the Monroe Institute ultimately came into existence, and why we are all sitting here together, technically speaking. Right. So we have Dr. Charles Start to thank for whatever has happened with the Monroe Institute.
In that book and its successor, Far Journeys, Monroe recorded his out-of-body experiences over 3 decades and established a reputation as a trailblazer in the exploration of the far reaches of human consciousness.
Of course, we've all read Far Journeys in our book readings. So naturally, we understand, right? He talked about what happens, what is his experiences. In the first book, it was more about his experiences when he was just going out of body. In Far Journeys, it became a better understanding of what happens when we are going out of the body and what is happening. What do you experience? What do you expect over there? And a deeper knowledge about that. And now in Ultimate Journeys,
he takes the exploration a stage further, though he would be the last to say that he has reached the limit.
So again, Robert Monroe always perceived that there was more to explore. There was always more to understand. There was always more to perceive, more to view, more to experience, right? So he never said it is the end.
There is one major difference between this book and its predecessors. Until now, the story has been Monroe's alone. It has been his own adventures he has described, his own meetings, dialogues, perils, and discoveries. In Ultimate Journey, he tells how he found the route, the new direction, traveled it, and uncovered the reason and the purpose for this pioneering expedition. And most important, he includes the reports of others who, through his new teaching program, have been able to read the map follow the direction, and fulfill the same purpose.
So again, what Robert Monroe was attempting to create was a roadmap for us to be able to experience the experiences that he had been experiencing, right? So that's the beauty of the entire Monroe process. We get a very, very clear roadmap as to how we can experience these states of consciousness when we are going into expanded states and what we can do in them. And he always said that go there and come back and tell us what you did, right? What did you experience? So that others can grow from the experience of other people who are doing the work, who are going into these expanded states of consciousness.
Those who are not familiar with the outer body state may find in this book echoes, significances, clues, or points of recognition that may remind them of something that happened in a dream, perhaps in that twilight state between sleep and wakefulness, or in a sudden moment of understanding or insight when everything seems to fall into place and make sense. Those who are familiar will, in addition, be aware of the difficulty of translating the experiences into language that is easily comprehended. All may know that it is possible for anyone to follow this new direction if belief systems are set aside and the mind is open and willing.
So again, many times we experience things, but we really don't know what we are experiencing, right? And many times we have experienced things, but we don't have words to be able to understand or translate them into what did we experience, because we have no reference point to be able to explain to others. What he is saying in this book is that all of us are capable of experiencing these experiences, whether we are in it or not. We just need to engage the process and we can actually experience all these experiences, provided if we allow ourselves to transcend our belief systems. Because our belief systems is the box which restrains us, which keeps us where we are. The moment we allow ourselves to transcend the belief systems, that is when we can open up new experiences for ourselves.
Those who are familiar will, in addition, be aware of the difficulty of translating the experiences into language that is easily comprehended. All may know that it is possible for anyone to follow this new direction if belief systems are set aside and the mind is open and willing. Monroe says that nothing in this book negates the validity of its two predecessors, which represent stages of growth and are accurate according to the knowns available through personal experience at the time. His personal experience while working on his third book, however, took a sad and unforeseen turn when his wife Nancy was diagnosed with cancer. His search for the missing basic was intensified by the knowledge that for Nancy's sake there was little time to spare. It is good to record that he completed his exploration and found both the new direction and the missing basic while Nancy was still with him in physical reality, and that he and others were able to apply the knowledge he gained to help her in her own ultimate journey.
So again, so what he's saying over here is that whatever his experience was in the two first books, right? Nothing in Ultimate Journeys actually negates that. It puts things into perspective as to what was being experienced. And of course, we've all heard this, that Nancy Monroe got cancer, and that resulted in the creation of the Dolphin Energy Club. It resulted in the creation of the Lifeline program, right? That's what he says over here, that what to know, what to do once we have transcended, that was experienced by most people and can be experienced by most people. And that search was intensified because he found that Nancy is going to transcend. So what could Nancy actually experience after she transcends? That was the result of the Lifeline program.
Chapter 1, The Variable. Fear is the great barrier to human growth.
Now,
It is-
this is again, fear is the great barrier to human growth. This is a very powerful statement, right? Whenever we are operating out of fear, we cannot create. We will not be able to transcend whatever we are doing, right? Whatever we are facing. So fear has to be transcended. It's the biggest barrier to any kind of growth that you want to experience or have in your life.
It is said that when we are born into this physical universe, we bring with us only two fears, of loud noise and of falling, both engendered by the birth process. As we grow older, we learn more and more fears so that by the time we reach maturity, we or most of us are loaded with them. We have grown physically, but our real growth, the realization of our true potential, has been sadly impeded.
So again, basically, he's saying over here two fears that we are born with, loud noise and of falling. There's another fear they say of bright light, right? But having said that, these are the two fears that we are born with. All the other fears are learned during our lifetime. So when something is learned, it can easily be transcended also. So the idea is that the more fears we let go of, the better off we are in finding our true path, right? Finding our true potential.
Unknowns create fears. We may fear the darkness because we don't know what's there. A physical pain may create fear because we don't know what it may imply. When these unknowns become knowns, the fears diminish and disappear, and we are able to cope with whatever confronts us.
So again, boundaries, right? When we are crossing a boundary of the known, that is when the unknown, when we are facing something which is unknown, that is when normally fears start to crop up. The moment an unknown becomes a known, there is no more fear about it. So the more we can face our fears, the more we can, head on look at what the fears are, the better off we will ultimately be.
All of us have enough unknowns in our lives and enough fears. We have no need to look for more. Yet there are times when we don't have any choice. Here is an example. This is how it was for me. It is the source for the material that follows.
So all of us have fears, right? All of us have unknowns in our life. But the more we can transcend our fears, the more we are tapping into our real potential.
It is generally believed that as we go through life, we don't really change. We just become more of the same, barring the usual exceptions that, as we say, prove the rule. When we look around us as the years go by, this seems quite valid. On the whole, people don't change, and most of us strongly resist change. Nevertheless, all our worries and woes are based upon change.
Okay, so the paragraph before, right? So what he's very clearly saying is that most of us are revolving in patterns. We are constantly doing the same thing. We don't change. We'll get up, we'll have breakfast, we'll go to the office, we'll do work, we'll come back, we'll have tea, we'll have dinner, we'll watch some TV, we'll go to sleep, right? Now, most of us are following a set routine throughout. We are not making new changes. We are not doing something differently, right? So that keeps us like a record player going round and round.
Nevertheless, all our worries and woes are based upon change. We fear that something will happen, or we fear that it won't. So we fight to prevent change or to speed up the process.
So again, we always resist change. Whenever there is change, fear props up. Why? Because we are stepping into the unknown.
But whatever we do, change is 100% guaranteed. The only question is its rate. Slow change we interpret as evolution, fast as revolution. Changes are the epitome of unknowns, the greatest of fears generators.
So change brings growth, right? Because change makes the unknown known. So if we are fearful of change, then we are creating a problem for ourselves. But everyone and most of us are fearful of change because we like to be in our comfort zone. Whenever we are stepping out of our comfort zone, that means change is occurring in our life.
In my own case, there seemed to be no choice. I fell unknowing to and panic stricken into the process that engendered the new recognition of reality, what I call the different overview that I now carry with me.
So again, what he is referring to is the vibrations that he started to experience just before he started having his out-of-body experiences. He did not work for it, right? It simply happened to him.
In my own case, there seemed to be no choice. I fell unknowing and panic stricken into the process that engendered the new recognition of reality, what I call the different overview that I now carry with me. The change in my life was not simply more of the same. It was something that hadn't worried me beforehand because I had no idea that such things existed. Was this change in my life accidental or evolutionary? To me, it was revolutionary.
Right. So that sudden out of body and that vibrations that he was experiencing created real revolution. It changed his entire perspective of life, what he was doing and what he was dealing with.
In 1958, without any apparent cause, I began to float out of my physical body. It was not voluntary. I wasn't attempting any mental feats. It was not during sleep, so I couldn't dismiss it as simply a dream. I had full conscious awareness of what was happening, which of course only made it worse. I assumed it was some form of severe hallucination caused by something dangerous, a brain tumor, a stroke, or impending mental illness, or imminent death.
So again, when he had his first out of body experience, he literally freaked out. He didn't really understand what was happening to him. And he was consciously aware of what was happening, right? So that made it even more frightful.
The phenomenon continued. I had no control over it. It occurred usually when I would lie down or relax for rest or preparatory to sleep, not every time, but several times weekly. I would float up a few feet above my body before I became aware of what was happening. Terrified, I would struggle through the air and back into my physical body. I was sure I was dying. Try as I might, I could not prevent it from recurring.
So it was happening spontaneously to him, right? And he had no control over it. So it was a total unknown. And that naturally made him fearful, thinking that he was going to die.
At the time, I thought I was in reasonably good health with no major problems or stress. I was fully occupied. I owned several radio stations and other businesses, had offices on Madison Avenue in New York, a home in Westchester County, and, not the least, a wife and two small children. I was taking no medication, used no drugs, and drank very little alcohol. I was not particularly involved in any religion Nor was I a student of philosophies or Eastern disciplines. I was completely unprepared for such a radical change.
So naturally, people feel when things happen like this to them, they feel that they are either druggies or they're having some kind of hallucination because of alcohol and other medication, etc. Right? Or people are practicing certain practices which may result in this kind of a thing happening. Right? He was not doing anything like that, and therefore he was totally unprepared for what really was happening to him.
It is impossible to describe the fear and the loneliness that took over during these episodes. There was no one I could talk with about it, not even my wife in the early days, because I didn't want to alarm her. Strongly attached to Western culture and science in general, I automatically turned to conventional medicine and orthodox science for answers. After extensive examinations and tests, my doctor reassured me that there was no brain tumor or physiological factor involved, but more he could not tell.
So again, all the tests were done, all the analysis was done, and nothing was wrong with him. Right? Now, at that time, there were no books in the Western world written about these experiences, etc. And he had really no one to turn to. So naturally, he was very, very lonely.
Eventually, I found the courage to talk to a psychiatrist and a psychologist, both of whom I knew as friends. One assured me I was not psychotic. He knew me too well. The other suggested indeterminate years of study under a guru in India, a concept wholly alien to me. I revealed to neither of them nor to anyone else how extremely frightened I was. I was a misfit in a culture of which I thought I was a part, a culture that I admired and respected.
So he felt that if he opened this Pandora's box up, he would be orchestrated from society. No, everyone would think he is crazy and hallucinating, etc. And then he would be kicked out of society. So he was really, really scared. Now, of course, the doctor suggested he go to India for studying under a guru because in India, people have been doing this for years. Now, naturally, since he was entrenched in the New York Society, in fact, in one of his talks that we hear in the Gateway Voyage, he clearly says that I had a mortgage, I had a wife, my children were going to school, I had a business to run, I had employees. How am I going to go to India for an indeterminate amount of time to be able to study under a guru? So, what did he do?
Yet the drive for survival is very strong. Slowly, very slowly, I learned to control the process. I found that it was not necessarily a prelude to dying, that it could be directed. But it took a full year before I came to accept the reality of the outer body experience, now familiarly known as OBE.
So he is the one who coined the term out of body experience, or OBE for short.
This came about as a result of some 40 carefully validated OBE trips, giving me and no one else extensive documentation. With this knowledge, the fear soon receded, to be replaced by something about almost as demanding curiosity.
So what does he say clearly here, right? That the unknown of the out of body experiences that he was experiencing spontaneously, when he started documenting them, they became known. Once they became known, there was no fear anymore. And now it was replaced by curiosity. Now, what is happening to me? How much further can I take it? What can I do in these states? That is what his questions started to become.
Still, something had to be done. I needed answers, and I was sure I would not find them in an Indian ashram. My thought processes were the product of Western civilization, for good or ill. Therefore, to provide systematic help to me and also to gather information related to the strange unknown, I set up a research and development division in the corporation privately owned by me and my family. This division later was detached and became eventually what is now the Monroe Institute.
So his company, all the R&D resources that his company had, he turned it towards researching as what was happening to him. And in that process, the Monroe Institute got created.
Thus, the original purpose was solely to solve my own personal and urgent problems, to convert my fear-producing unknowns into knowns if at all possible. That meant learning how to control and understand the out-of-body experience.
So again, as soon as we can manage, we can understand whatever experience we are having, it becomes a known, and then we can start working with it.
To begin with, I was the only one I knew who needed such help. So the motive was personal and selfish, not profound, idealistic, or noble. I offer no apology for this. I was the one who paid the bills.
So he was paying the bills, he had the money. So naturally, he was wanting to understand what was happening to him.
In a contemporary view, the OBE is a state of consciousness where you perceive yourself as distinct and separate from your physical body. This separateness can be 2 inches or 2,000 miles or more. You can think, act, and perceive in this state much as you do physically, although with some important exceptions.
So in the OBE state, most of your senses are active.
In the early stages of OBE activity, you seem to retain the form of your physical body, head, shoulders, arms, legs, and so on.
So again, we always resonate and want to be, close to what is familiar, right? What is a known. So in the OBE state also, we perceive ourselves as what we are in the physical human life existence form. That same form we experience ourselves in the beginning.
In the early stages of OBE activity, you seem to retain the form of your physical body, head, shoulders, arms, legs, and so on. As you become more familiar with this other state of being, you may become less humanoid in shape. It is similar to gelatin when taken out of the mold. For a short period, it retains the form of the mold, then it begins to melt around the edges, and finally, it becomes a liquid or a blob. When this happens in an OBE, it takes only a thought for you to become totally human again in shape and form.
So again, you don't have to have the humanoid shape when you're going into an out-of-body experience. But having said that, we generally visualize ourselves as that. But as we become more familiar, we can become just a point of light or any other shape. But we are going into thought responsive universes. So as soon as we respond, right, as soon as we want to become humanoid again, it's a matter of just setting an intent and we are back into the same shape.
From this description, it is clear that this second body is extremely plastic. However, it is very important to know that whatever the shape, you remain you. That does not change, except that you discover you are more than you realized.
So again, very, very important, right? The shape that you are in is not important. The conscious awareness with which you exist is what is your essence, right? It is not your shape which determines you. So over here, he is very clearly stating that whatever shape you may be in, you are still you.
As to where you go and what you do, there seems to be no limitation. If there is, we have not found it. In an out-of-body state, you are no longer bounded by time-space. You can be in it, but not part of it. You, your non-physical self, are comfortable in another energy system. You have a great sense of freedom, yet you are not totally free. You are like a balloon or a kite or a tether at the other end of the cord. The invisible cord is your physical body.
So again, when we are going into these expanded states of consciousness, we are not bound by time and space. We have a lot more freedom than what we have when we are in the physical body. But having said that, we do not have total freedom because we are still connected by a cord to our physical body and we need to return to it, right? The simplest thing that we tell people is that if you're having an out of body experience, never fear because your bladder will bring you back. So you're connected to your physical body and you will respond if the physical body needs something.
Early in our investigation, we realized that we live in a culture and civilization where waking physical consciousness is the most vital of all qualities. It is not easy to make a case for any state of being that is different. A little inquiry soon produces any number of anomalies which cannot be fitted or answered within the confines of current knowns or belief systems, bearing in mind that belief is a currently popular label for anything that cannot be fully understood or identified.
So again, we have various states of consciousness. For example, we have waking state and we have a sleep state. They're two totally different states of consciousness. What we can do in a waking state, we cannot do in a sleep state. And what we can do in a sleep state, we cannot do in a waking state. So there are many things that are happening around us which cannot be defined by these two states. So there have to be other states in between, beyond and beyond both the sides, right? But having said that, we operate with our current belief systems. Now, if something is not being understood, it is not in our belief system, then we cannot understand it. So we need to open our belief systems up to actually understand and identify something which is beyond the belief system that we operate in.
We began to work on questions about consciousness in general. What happens to it when we become unconscious through a hit on the head, shock, fainting, alcohol or drug overdose, anesthesia, sleep, or death? Is consciousness akin to a magnetic field produced by an electromagnet that ceases to exist once that electricity is cut off? If so, does it get weaker or stronger if we vary the electrical current? If we do this, we are doing it without any awareness of the how of it. How can we control such action, if at all?
So again, the question is, where does our consciousness exist, right? Does it exist in the body or exists elsewhere? That is the basic question that he is asking.
It is easy enough to raise these questions which simply beget more questions with no trace of an answer. We soon become aware that a huge information gap exists. We needed some premise that might indicate a direction to follow. We moved away from seeking materialistic explanations to look at the other end of the spectrum. What if consciousness does continue when the current is reduced? Immediately, we began to find examples.
So again, in the first case, the existence of the magnetic field was dependent on the current, right? Now, if the current is reduced, then what? What really happens?
We moved away from seeking materialistic explanations to look at the other end of the spectrum. What if consciousness does continue when the current is reduced? Immediately, we began to find examples. The problem is that when out of body, We have lost consciousness and yet we haven't. Our memory is or is not impaired. Some of our physical senses are working and some are not, and so on. At the least, we don't have total consciousness as we like to think of it, and therefore we don't regard this state as valid. One body of thought holds that if you can't move your physical body, or if it doesn't respond to stimulus, you're not conscious as we understand the term. Or if you cannot communicate by current standards, you're not conscious. Yet there have been many comatose human beings who have continued to be conscious. They simply had not the means to communicate physically.
So again, now with so many other experiences coming up with people in coma, with people having near-death experiences, etc., it is understood now that consciousness can actually exist even if the physical body is not responding.
Thus, to explain or explain away all of the many physical functions we perform without conscious awareness, our culture had to invent non-conscious systems. These are identified as autonomic, subconscious, limbic, and so on, including sleep. Any activity we cannot willfully control is not within consciousness.
So over here, our normal explanation is that what we are in conscious control of, that is what consciousness is dealing with. Anything that is beyond that is not consciousness, right? So again, now in the excursion workshop, etc., we talk about the small guy and the big guy. What he's saying over here is that what we can control by the small guy was considered consciousness in our general belief system. But a lot of stuff gets controlled and is very, very efficiently controlled at a subconscious level, right? By the big guy. So again, our definition of what is consciousness is a little skewed as of now.
At the Monroe Institute in the 1960s, we began not only historical research into aspects of consciousness, but also study of outer body events, mine and others. We discovered that many OBEs have been related to the sleep state and thus dismissed as simply dreams.
So what he's saying here is that all of us have out-of-body experiences during our dream state. When we are going into deep sleep, we all go out of body, right? But it is dismissed as a dream.
At the Monroe Institute, we discovered that many OBEs have been related to the sleep state and thus dismissed as simply dreams, except that they do not fit the hazy and unreal quality associated with dreaming. Other spontaneous OBEs have occurred under anesthesia during surgery, when the patient found himself 6 or 8 feet above the operating table and later reported accurately what he heard and saw from this vantage point, a physical impossibility. Events such as these happen frequently, but for the most part are never publicly reported.
So during anesthesia, during an operation, a person actually moves out of body or has a near-death experience and is observing exactly what is happening in the operation.
Other incidental OBEs occur during what are regarded as unconscious periods caused by accident or injury. Mostly these are categorized as freak events and are tucked away in memory as anomalies or something that didn't really happen. Our belief systems would not allow it to be otherwise.
So near-death experience during an accident or injury.
Some of the most striking of the spontaneous OBEs are now often identified as near-death experiences. Again, these occur frequently, usually during surgery under anesthesia. Most have the effect of changing completely the belief systems of the patients, providing them with a genuine, different overview. They return knowing that not only are they more than their physical bodies, but that without equivocation, they will survive physical death.
So the belief systems of a person who experiences a full-blown NDE, that's a near-death experience, mostly takes a very big turn. Their fear of death starts to get eliminated. They become more gratitude-driven. They become more helpful, and there are a list of things which are the changes that normally take place in a person when you had a near-death experience.
Our history is full of references to what we now call out-of-body experiences, including the language we use. You are beside yourself, out of your mind, you fall asleep, wake up, pass out. One of the very few relevant surveys in the past 10 years showed that over 25% of our national population recalled having at least one spontaneous out-of-body experience.
So all of us actually experience it. We don't know what it is, so we can't put our finger to it.
If you think about it, you may be among that 25%. Can you remember having a flying dream with or without an airplane? Can you remember dreaming of looking for your car among many others in a parking lot, finding it and waking up immediately after doing so? We often subconsciously look upon our car as an additional body. Can you remember having a falling dream where you wake up instead of hitting bottom? This is quite common when re-entry into the physical body is hastened by the ringing of an alarm clock.
So again, if you are having a flying dream, right? Many a times, because the mind wants to wrap around what's happening, it just shows you as if you're flying. It may be an airplane, it may be without an airplane, it may be in a glider, but you feel like you're flying. Now, when an alarm clock rings, you are suddenly brought back with a spank, right? With a duck. So you suddenly come up and with a jerk, you wake up, right? That's coming in from an out-of-body experience into your physical body.
Until 1970, the whole research effort operated quietly, if not covertly. After all, I was the head of a conventional business dealing with conventional people. I was sure that any public revelation of my secret life activity would bring doubt of my ability to conduct responsible business affairs.
So again, fearful of what he was experiencing because there was no explanation, right? And he was thinking that people would think he has gone cuckoo, he has gone off his rockers.
But I could not remain silent forever. With the publication of my first book, Journeys Out of the Body, our work began to attract much attention. We were able to select a number of volunteers as subjects in our laboratory. Most of them were able to replicate the outer body state so familiar to me, using the methods we had developed.
So these subjects were ultimately called the explorers. A group of explorers used to come in regularly to the lab and they used to test what was happening and they used to have experiences. We actually hear a live recording in the Gateway Voyage of an explorer session where the first soul or soul of a guy called Patrick was done by Robert Monroe.
During the 1980s, talks on out-of-body experiences were given at various colleges and universities, on radio and TV, and even at the Smithsonian Institution.
So the Smithsonian Institution is basically an institution which is the archives of all kind of documentation. They have beautiful museums. If anyone goes to Washington, D.C., I would suggest keep 2 days to visit all the museums of the Smithsonian Institute.
3 papers were delivered on the subject at the annual convention of the American Psychiatric Association. The presentation being sponsored by the University of Kansas Medical Center and the Monroe Institute. Currently, there are occasional cartoon jokes in magazines based upon the out-of-body state as real. T-shirts have OBE themes, and even Bob Hope had an out-of-body joke on a TV appearance. The reality of the OBE is slowly becoming accepted, and the term OBE is now part of our language.
So up to now, it was not familiar, but now more and more people are becoming familiar with these terms.
What are the knowns regarding the out-of-body experience? First, while there is nothing new about realizing that you are more than your physical body, you now have a means of proving it to yourself. We also believe that by applying other criteria, it can be proved to the scientific community and to the rest of humankind. To date, however, we know of no way to do this except through individual personal experience. But we do know that the tools are available to perform this verification.
So now a lot of verification is being done at the institute also using the mind mirror. So there is a program called the Discovery Program where all the participants are hooked onto the mind mirror and they are experiencing experiences, or they're hearing tracks which are going to help them to get out of body. And we are actually figuring it out. In fact, I was there in one of the discovery programs. I was monitoring a person, actually caught her having an out-of-body experience on the mind mirror. Because there is a graph which comes when you have an out-of-body experience, all the frequencies simply shrink very fast and it becomes a straight line. And she actually experienced that and I caught it on screen, right? So now we have means of saying or attempting to discover when someone is having an out-of-body experience.
A controlled out-of-body experience is the most efficient means we know to gather knowns to create a different overview. First, and perhaps most important, among these knowns is survival of physical death. If there is a better way than the OB of knowing that this takes place, not just hoping, having faith, or believing, but knowing we are unaware of it. All of those who become only mildly proficient in the OBE soon reach this stage of knowing. In addition, such survival takes place whether we like it or not, and without any consideration as to what we do or are in physical life. It makes no difference. Survival of self beyond physical existence is a natural and automatic process. We wonder how we could ever become so limited in our thinking.
So he is very clearly stating here that there is life after physical death, right? And whatever we may be doing here, it doesn't matter. We will still be consciously aware once we transcend the physical body. So many times people say you'll go to hell and you'll do this, you'll do that. All that really doesn't matter because whatever you're going to experience afterwards is your experience, right? We are the creators of our reality and we will experience reality the way that we create it. And especially in an expanded state of consciousness or in states like NDEs and out-of-body experiences, we can actually create our experience.
Next, the greatest barrier to proficiency in out-of-body experiencing is fear. Fear of the unknown and of physical death.
So naturally, people who have out-of-body experiences, their fear of death actually comes down. And this is something that we've noticed, people who've attended programs, if you ask them, their fear of death has come down simply because we come to understanding, it becomes a known that we will survive physical death.
The attachment of our mind consciousness to the physical environment is very strong. Virtually all of what we think is expressed in time-space terms. But now we find ourselves faced with the need to translate something completely alien into something understandable here and now.
So again, we have to develop our own language in these states and then develop means to bring back what we are experiencing over there into words or into actions, etc., which will allow others to be able to understand what we are talking about when we are in those expanded states.
The only way we have learned to ease these fears is to move into the OBE process, one step at a time, in slow motion, as it were. This permits the novice to absorb and become accustomed to small changes and learn to know that such changes are not dangerous or threatening to physical life. As these changes accumulate, we help the student to look back continually to complete physical awareness, so that there is an ongoing familiar point of reference. Gradually, the basic fears are released.
So again, slow steps, one step at a time. We go there, come back, go there, come back, go further, come back, go further, come back, go further, come back. Right. This is the matrix system that even a newborn child follows, like we read in Magical Child. The first matrix being the womb of the mother, then the familiar surrounding, then the expanded familiar surrounding, then going out of that surrounding. Right. So likewise, the more we start stepping out, the more familiar that territory becomes, and the more reference points we create for ourselves in those states of consciousness. Then it becomes easier to access those states.
Most important, the mind consciousness present in the outer body state is significantly different from that in physical wakefulness. Initially, intellectual and analytical focus do not seem to be present, at least not in terms we understand. However, the insertion of physical consciousness changes this. Conversely, the emotional extremes of the symbolic right brain are often totally absent and are usually more difficult to activate. Love, in a strict interpretation, is not considered an emotion in this context.
So again, the right brain is normally not active in normal society, right? And when we are going into these states, the right brain has to get activated. It has to integrate. And that's when we really start experiencing things.
In the outer body mind consciousness, all of what we are shows up front and out in the open, so to speak. There is no sub or non-consciousness hidden under layers of restraint. Thus, there cannot be any deceit or deviousness because all of us is on display. Whatever we are, we radiate the facts. There is always some carryover from our physical thought and conditioning, which we eventually release and reject if it gets in the way.
So again, when we are going into these expanded states, nothing is hidden. Everything is a known. You cannot hide anything, right? So we need to understand that the more truthful you are to yourself and to everything that's happening around you, the better off you are. Because in these expanded states, you cannot hide anything. Everything is there for the seer to be able to see. And of course, whatever we are experiencing here, we can carry it there, right? But having said that, if it creates a problem, then we need to release them. We need to release our limitations. We need to release our belief systems to become who we truly are. What is our real potential?
It is perhaps equally important that we learn in the OB state just how much more we are than our physical bodies. The answer to exactly how and why we exist is readily available if we have the desire and courage to find out. When we search for information, we may not like the answers we receive, but we know we have the correct one.
So in these expanded states, we can get lots of answers. But if we are expecting the answer that we expect, it is better to accept the unexpected, because many times the answers we get are not in conjunction with what we think the answers will be.
If you want to prove to yourself and to no one else that we survive physical death, you can learn to move into the outer body state and seek out a friend, relative, or someone close to you who has recently died. To find them, all you need to do is tune in on your memory of what that person was or represented.
So again, we can tune into any person. All of us have a unique ID, ident. He called it the ident in far journeys, right? So in far journeys, he was looking for the inspect, and he had an ident for the inspect. So when he focused on the ident for the inspect, he reached exactly where the inspect was, right? So like that, anyone who has transcended, when we go into these altered states, the ident of that person is your memory of that person. The moment you think of that person, you are with that person.
Several such meetings will be enough. You will have your proof, not for anyone else but for you. You will need to make this contact relatively soon after their passing, because most of them rapidly lose interest in the life they have just completed.
So once you transcend, you understand that the life you've completed was really of no major importance, right? So you take the lessons from there and you may forget it. So you may not be able to find it. But what we find in the Lifeline program is that 9 out of 10 times we can connect with that consciousness that has transcended.
Moving into the outer body state is an excellent means of gathering information. One of the easiest information runs you can make is checking on the welfare of a loved one. It is also probably the most simple of OB targets. If you are separated from your spouse or mate because of a business trip, for example, it's very comforting to home in on her or him to be sure everything is all right. For example, when one of our daughters was away at college, I would occasionally drop in during an OBE to see how she was getting along. However, I made the mistake of telling her about this on one of her visits home. A year later, she told me that after this disclosure, every night just before bedtime, she would say to the ceiling in her room, "If you are around, Dad, good night."
So what happens? We can actually get information about our loved one. We can actually get information about literally anything that we want when we are in these expanded states.
Voyeurism is almost non-existent in the OB state. There is much more exciting action available. You can go anywhere in any time, past, present, or future, via OBEs. You can go directly to any chosen place and observe what is there in detail and what is going on. At your target site, you can move around the area to observe from different perspectives. The only problem is that you cannot pick up physical objects. Your hand goes right through them.
So naturally, we are vibrating at a different frequency, right? So your hand can go through. Although it is possible to learn how to move things in an OBE state. This is the result of what happens with polterologists, etc., where suddenly things start to fall and all that.
With this freedom, you can follow the route our explorative research at the Institute has taken. You can go anywhere on Earth, or in it and through it. You can move outward and play around the moon and the solar system. It is beautiful and awe-inspiring, but it can become monotonous. Thus, we saw and knew the other side of the moon before the NASA probes took their pictures. It was the same with Mars, where we were looking for artifacts such as buildings or structures that might indicate some form of intelligent life. Some of us even made a number of runs outside the solar system and usually got lost, in the sense that we could not establish where we had gone in relation to Earth. Getting back was no problem. The explorer simply focused on his physical body. There is no speed of light limitation.
So the moment you focus on your physical body, boom, you are back. So in the out of body state, we've actually, they at the institute, they've explored Mars, they've explored that, and many of the things that are written about what was in Mars, etc., was found when the probes actually reached Mars and actually took pictures. Very similar things were there.
If there are intelligent beings in the physical universe, we failed to find them. Either they were hidden, or more likely, we didn't know what to look for. Of course, our exploration was infinitesimal. Perhaps we had investigated the further galaxies, we would have met someone out there. One day, maybe one of us will.
So now this is written before, but afterwards he actually said that they had met other intelligent beings. And this is something that is explored in Starline's Reunion.
In the non-physical universe, it was an entirely different matter. We encountered hundreds, if not thousands, most of them non-human. Exploration out of body is a prime means for functioning outside the physical universe. The second body of the OB state is certainly not physical. It is part of another energy system that commingles with the Earth life system, but is out of phase with it. The clue lies in how easy it is to find those who have left physical existence.
So again, there's a phasing, right? So he starts talking about phasing now. It's very much like the TV where, you're hearing the sound of one channel and the picture of another channel. So in between physical life existence, there are other lives, and OB state is in between those states. There's one more page, we can complete this chapter.
When you look for action in this other energy system, the effect is near instantaneous. The system is very well populated, and you meet some special friends when you become proficient in OBEs.
So after a person passes away, their reality is there, and you can actually meet people who have transcended.
The highways and byways of out-of-body adventures and exploration are broad and varied, for the most part beyond ordinary time-space concepts. We can understand only that portion which relates to the Earth life system. We may attempt to report the rest of it, and it seems limitless, but we have no acceptable or comparable baseline of knowledge and experience to do this accurately. The problem lies in trying to understand it and to translate what you find, to bring it back. Never be surprised when you return to the physical to find tears running down your cheeks.
So this happens a lot, right? In the programs, people suddenly have tears running down their cheeks and they don't know what has happened, right? Many times we experience stuff which is beyond comprehension. And when we come back, the tears are there.
What has happened is that you have gone off the edge of the known map and have returned with some previous important unknowns, now converted to knowns. You may or may not convince others of this reality. Most do not try. the individual knowledge is enough. Think how such knowledge, not belief or faith, would affect your own life pattern. The knowledge that you are indeed more than your physical body, that you do indeed survive physical death. These two unknowns converted to knowns with no conditions or contingencies. What a difference that would make.
So again, when we realize, right, that we are more than our physical body and we are going to survive death, it really changes our perspective about how we are living life.
A different overview, a clear way of perceiving, can make these into personal knowns and more, much more. So unlatch your security belief belt, grab your climbing spurs and perhaps a mache, and let's hit the high road.
So basically, we are going into an exploration of these expanded states of consciousness in this